You've been to Jazz Fest a number of times. What's your impression of the show? Like, the event that they put on here.
I love playing Berks Jazz Festival because it's an amazing situation that the folks from the Berks Jazz Festival have created a jazz destination in Wyomissing or Reading, Pennsylvania. Because when I think about where do I want to go to see jazz, I go to New York City. And there's a few other cities, San Francisco, Chicago. There's not many cities in the US that actually have a great jazz scene. For instance, LA, forget about it.
That's hair bands.
Not happening. London has a good jazz scene, and Paris has a good jazz scene, and Reading, PA has a good jazz scene. And it's really because of this festival, and then the weekly concerts that they've done over the years, here at the Jazz Base. So it's fun to play here because the audience is discerning and well-informed because they've seen a lot of jazz. They've been to a lot of concerts. So it's, and that's the kind of audience that we want to play for. It's the most fun to play for. There's a sophisticated audience that's heard a lot of music because they can appreciate the subtleties, the excitement. They can just appreciate the whole feeling of what goes on in a room when jazz musicians are playing and the energy's high and there's something going on that's special in the room. And the musicians and the audience really have an interplay. As much as the jazz musicians have an interplay, the audience's responsibility that really inspires us is for them to be really listening closely and not texting and taking videos and doing email. And that's what we get here, but that's what we get here. The audience is into it and their attention really inspires us.
You've played some of the biggest venues in the world, in previous ventures.
Sure.
What's it like, the intimacy of a show like this? This venue, the capacity is 240 by way of the fire marshal.
Yeah, right.
That intimacy with the fans must
well,
really...
I've played, for instance, like JFK Stadium. I think it holds about 90,000 people, and I've played there a few times. Once opening for the Rolling Stones with Journey, and then we headlined it a couple times in the early '80s. And of course, those are amazing events to be involved with. And to play for people, that many people. But it is not, of course, an intimate kind of interaction with the audience. It's a spectacle. and people are excited and they love hearing the songs that they enjoy. But I don't think, in general, the people aren't listening to the nuance of what all the musicians are doing. They're singing along and they're enjoying the presentation. And this is a very different kind of situation, playing in a small jazz room where there's a lot of attention to detail, and I like that, because I have a lot of attention to detail, and I want to play with a wide range of dynamics. And you can't really do that so well in a big stadium. Everything's kind of bigger than life all the time. And here, I can play with brushes, I can play very quietly, then it can get loud, and it's got a lot of expression. And I can see the people watching me, and there's some nice interaction that happens, and so I prefer touring and playing jazz live. I've been invited to tour with Journey, and the availability for me to play on other pop tours is there, but it's something I choose not to do because it's of course, like the small venue is interesting with the audience, but also the level of musicianship that I can interact with when I tour with jazz musicians inspires me. And I'm a kind of musician that, being basically a jazz musician, even though I can do a lot of different things, my roots are as a jazz musician. So if I look at the creative process of playing rock music, the creative process happens when you're writing the song and when you're recording the song. And that's fun and interesting to be involved with because something comes out of nothing.
Sure.
But once that creative process is completed, and then the band goes on tour to play those tunes, it's the recreative process. It's once that song is written and my drum parts are composed, then the challenge is, how do I breathe life into it every night? It would be maybe like an actor in a play. And you know, there's a certain challenge to that, in feeling like it's fresh every night. But I've become accustomed to the freedom of jazz music, where we have a structure, but you can't play it the same every night. You don't want to play it the same every night. And the beauty of it is that something new happens every time we play.
Very organic.
It's organic, we're in the moment, we're listening and responding to each other, and I'm more addicted to that, you know, to that feeling and that excitement than the big spectacle. That I did that and it was exciting, but I really do feel like been there, done that. So
you've been to the area with Buddies.
Yes.
I think you were here with Jazz Legacy.
Yes.
And
right.
now it's Vital Information. You've kind of merged those groups into
this group is called
Information 30th.
This group is actually called Vital Information NYC Edition.
Okay.
And the difference with this group is generally Vital Information is a quartet, electric quartet,
okay,
with electric keyboards, electric bass, and electric guitar and drum set. I'm the only acoustic musician. So, but what's different about the NYC, and that's with Vinnie Valentino on guitar, Baron Brown on bass, and Tom Coster on keyboards.
Okay.
Well, Tom, being 71 years old and having played in the music business for many years and toured with Santana for a long time, he bought himself a nice condominium in Mexico on the beach. So when it's cold, he likes to go to Mexico and spend 6 months of the year. So that left me like, what do I do? You know, I still want to play some gigs. So I do live in New York City, and like you mentioned, I've been here with Buddies, and Jazz Legacy. Two of the guys that are in those groups, Andy Fusco on the alto saxophone and Mark Soskin on the keyboards, are great musicians that I love playing with. And so I have them come out with Vital Information. And so with that lineup, we have an alto saxophone, and then Mark plays a Fender Rhodes and acoustic piano. So he's got a different approach than Tom. But we can still play the Vital Information music, plus the Buddies music, plus the Jazz Legacy. So we have a very wide palette. And we've been recently in the studio to record our own new album, and we have some music and arrangements written specifically for this lineup. So it's NYC, meaning all these guys live in New York City. So it's really easy for us to get together and do a gig, and you know, we played in New York last week. Last night we're in Washington D.C. Today we're here. You know, then we're in Boston, and so we can tour around the East Coast in a reasonably financially efficient manner, where I don't have to fly somebody in from Mexico to do a couple of gigs. You know, this just wouldn't work.
What's your opinion on the climate of music nowadays? I know with the advent of the internet, the Napster, the YouTubes, you know.
Are you asking me about the climate of music or the climate of music business?
The climate of the music business, actually, because
yeah.
I mean, you get to play these really intimate shows, and you get to change it up every night. You know, like with the bands, those metal bands, those rock bands, and even the country artists.
Yes.
Sort of about the creative process and doing the same thing, repetition every night. I mean,
and some people that might be fine. It's just not for me. But anyway,
sure,
what is your question?
Just what's your take on the climate of the music industry at this point? Is it the same? Can it be the same as it was when you toured with Journey and weren't, you know, a member of that band, or?
Well, it's not ever going to be the same as it was in the 60s, 70s,
sure,
and 80s. And as far as if you're asking me, you know, the climate of it, it's very bleak. You know, it's very difficult as a musician to make a living now. It's more difficult than it used to be. And there's, you know, definitely a lot of reasons for that. And, you know, really, of course, the biggest one is that there's probably a couple of generations of young music lovers who steal music regularly from the internet. But the difficult part for me is most of them don't see it as such. In other words, if I was sitting at a CD table after a gig and I have my CD in front of me for sale and somebody came up and picked it up and walked away with the music, that's clearly theft. Sure. But if they take it from the internet, it's really the same. There's no difference to that. But somehow, there's a bit of denial going on where this downloading is really a euphemism for stealing. So of course that has really wreaked havoc in the music business. And a lot of people talk about, well, the record companies, we're making more money than they should. I'm not a huge fan of record companies, but I do know, because I have now tried the model of being my own record company, and it really doesn't work for me. It's too expensive to make records and then to promote the music and hire publicists, and even with social media, which I do, Facebook and websites and Twitter and all that, it's still never enough to sell. I don't ever get to sell enough records because people are not, they're stealing a lot of it. And even with iTunes and selling at gigs, I don't sell enough to even pay back the budget that it costs me to make the record. And I have to pay for it myself because I can't get signed by a record company. Now in former years, jazz has always been a tough business. But people would, for instance, I made 16 albums for the label called Tone Center. The guy would call me up, the president, he would give me a budget. For instance, in those days, he'd give me a $25,000 budget. I was able to pay the musicians, I was able to pay the studio, I was able to pay myself something and make a record, and then they marketed it. So in the end of the day, we all made money. And we made some very nice music, and I was inspired to make the music because somebody said, let's make a record and here's some money to do it. I'm much less inspired these days because if I want to make a record, I have to pay for it myself, and I end up, it costs me whatever it costs me, $10, $15, $20, $30,000 sometimes, depending on how ambitious the project is. So it's very difficult to do this. So the best situation that I've come up with now for myself is that I make a record and make it for as inexpensive as possible, but I'm not like a garage band, that I can go into my Mac at home and make a record. We need to play the music together in a good studio. Sure. And we can, and like with the Vital Information NYC record that we just made, we did make it in 2 days. We rehearsed, we knew the tunes, we went in the studio and we made basically actually a day and a half. We did the whole record. Now that's typical of what jazz records were like in the 50s and even in the 60s. So, but it still costs money, and I have to pay the guys in the band, and then I have to pay my engineer to mix it in the studio. So definitely costs money. But what I do is I have a record company license it and put it out. And that's more cost effective because I've tried doing it myself and they disappear. It's too difficult to market them. But I go with BFM Jazz, and BFM Jazz put out my latest recording, which is called Live One Great Night. And it's with the Vital Information Quartet with Tom Coster, Vinnie Valentino, and Baron Brown and myself. It's a CD and a DVD. I paid for it, but they distribute it. So then they pay for the marketing, and then they pay, for the promotion. And then at some point, if that budget gets paid off, we split the profits. So that's the new model. Okay. But again, we still have a lot of expenses to spread the word, and we do everything we can. But but we're not on television. We can use the internet, but still, it's still very difficult. And even idealistic people think, oh, it's better now for the artists. I definitely disagree. It's definitely not for me, and most of my friends and most people in my position. It's far worse, and so it's difficult for us. So we do have to tour. And we love touring, but that really is the sole source of income now, is touring. So it's a more difficult climate. to surviving in the music business now.
One final question. What's new coming up new for you guys? Other than what, the recording, what can people expect in the coming months and
Sure.
Even up in the next year or two?
Well, the Vital Information NYC Edition has a new studio record coming out in October on BFM Jazz, and then hopefully at some point we'll do some more touring to promote that. But the reason that we make the record is to help us get the gigs, and that's why we have to keep making the records, because even though they don't sell a lot, the promoters want to know you have a new record, so they'll book you. And so you can get an interview, and so you can get some publicity.
Sure.
And so it's still, the music business still runs on new product. It's a very key point. I couldn't just stop making records and keep touring. Eventually, people lose interest. But we do have that album coming out in October. I also am involved with an app that is for the iPad and iPhone. It's called Drum Guru, and it's drum lessons that you can download. For $4.99, you buy like a pack of 10 lessons, awesome. And they're each about 5 minutes long, approximately. And I have a couple of packs on Drum Guru, so you can, on your iPad, you look at it, look for it in the App Store, and you download the app for free. And then you get lessons from me, Steve Gadd, Dave Garibaldi, Chad Smith, Mike Portnoy. A lot of good people have lessons on there. Awesome. I have some Journey lessons, like how to play some Journey drum parts, and I have some soloing lessons, it's like general drum solo stuff. And I'm going to be making some more lessons for Drum Guru. It's a really nice project. And then there's a book that I'm working on with Hudson Music. Okay. And the book is called Roots of Rock Drumming. And the idea behind that is trying to get to the bottom of what happened in the late 40s and early 50s that helped the incubation period that went from early rhythm and blues to early rock and roll. And I'm talking about like the years of Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and I went and interviewed the drummers from all these groups, and I found some of them weren't alive anymore, of course, but then the ones that were, like Jerry Allison from the Crickets and DJ Fontana from Elvis's group, and J.M. Van Eaton, a drummer that played with Jerry Lee Lewis in 1954, and sure. And then I went to England and interviewed drummers there that played on all the studio recordings, from Petula Clark and Tom Jones, to found out who the drummer was with the Dave Clark Five, that it wasn't Dave Clark on those records. It's a guy named Bobby Graham. And then we went to L.A. and interviewed Hal Blaine, and Las Vegas, and interviewed Sandy Nelson, who had a bunch of hits in the late 50s and the early 60s. So it's a really interesting book full of interviews and then just essays about what happened that helped create rock and roll drumming. And it's an interesting and yet untold story that a lot of people don't really understand and know what happened in those years, because people didn't put out drummers' credits. They didn't put musician credits on the records, and a lot of these guys are, they were older jazz musicians that ended up playing on studio sessions. So quite interesting story. So that will come out. That book with a DVD with some of the interview footage will be released at some point, and people will be able to get it online, or hopefully Barnes and Nobles, or
Amazon, probably.
Yeah, of course, Amazon too.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add, Steve?
Anything else?
Yeah, anything else you'd like to add? Just to...
Well, go to my website, vitalinformation.com, and just to keep up with what I'm doing touring-wise. I'm going to be touring all summer with Hiromi and Anthony Jackson, with the Hiromi, the Trio Project, and she's an amazing virtuosic pianist and prolific composer, and so that's a lot of fun. I'll be also doing some touring with Mike Stern later this year, and then we will make another Vital Information studio record at some point this year with the quartet to be released in 2014. So I have a pretty full plate that I'm working with. I'll be at the Iridium in New York pretty soon with Randy Brecker and a nice Miles Davis tribute. So check out, you can sign up for my newsletter, or my Twitter address is @SteveSmithDrums, I always send out tweets of what we're doing every day, sound check and gigs and things like that. It's fun to keep up with.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.